The next thing is constructing proper brain chemistry. So this is something I'm really into. I'm really into human potential and how to activate genius. And by the way, activating genius has everything to do with activating our genes, our genetic potential, right? And so one of the ways we interact with that is through our brain, by way of the thoughts we think. That's probably the biggest thing, right? The thoughts we think, the food we eat, our immediate environment, our immediate influences from like family and friends, and getting really clear on what's conducive to our life and what is not, and drawing that line, right? No longer allowing ourselves to be a product of our immediate environment. There's an interesting idea that I grew up with success literature. I grew up with like all the Earl Nightingale, Automobile University, The Strangest Secret. Does anyone know what that is? The Strangest Secret? Still a damn secret, isn't it? So Earl Nightingale in the 1950s thought the strangest secret was you are what you think about most of the time and nobody knows it. And it appears to be the similar thing. Except really what it is now is that you are what you eat and nobody knows it. And that's really, to me, over the years of being onto this whole like you are what you think about idea, I've been into that for like 15 years of my life. Literally, I've read all those books. I've obsessively scoured that stuff. And it's been great, but what I found was that it's incomplete, right? Up until like Anthony Robbins in his Unlimited Power book, he's the first person to talk about like juicing. Beyond that, it was like, no, you just everything, it's all God. That's the one. That is the one that just kind of like, I'm just like, no, they're like, so one of my friends was eating potato chips or something. I'm like, there's like a disconnect. She's like, oh, it's all God. I'm like, that plastic bag is not God. God didn't make the potato chips. So it's like we kind of trick ourselves a lot of times, right? You are what you eat, though, is the underlining factor to that, right? Well, we won't go into that. 20 to 30% of your brain chemistry is based on the calories that you eat. 20 to 30% of the calories that you consume go straight in to feed your brain, right? And dictate. So it doesn't make sense that what we think is actually being influenced by what we eat. Does that make any sense? Yeah. Or it doesn't matter. It doesn't have any effect, right? What we put into our golden temple, it's no big deal, right? People are doing just fine out there on Cheetos, Doritos, Fritos, Domino's Pizza, and the whole lot, right? And by the way, I have to give the body and the mind a lot of credit because growing up as an athlete, I was constructed out of that stuff. The materials that were building my body and my physiology and my neurology were based on like Domino's Pizza, Ding Dongs, Twinkies, all kinds of meat products and dairy and the whole thing, right? And I have to give it a lot of credit because I'm still here. But now I know the difference. Because now I'm constructed out of the best food imaginable, and I feel the difference. I know the difference. I can see it visually, but I mean, I could just feel it within my own body. Hallelujah. Huge difference. My thoughts are so much clearer. Balancing brain hormones, and which are basically your neurotransmitters. So stuff like serotonin, like dopamine, like GABA, adrenaline, these kind of things. These are critical for really just to feel good. These are the chemicals that get secreted to help us balance out, to regulate our mood, to help us feel better. We have to have a natural production of like serotonin, for example. And so this is what I was getting to in the beginning of that picture right here. This picture, this is the difference between depression, anxiety, poor mood, low patience, all of it, road rage, and this is levity. This is levitation. This is good feelings all the way around. This is enthusiasm, inspiration, motivation. Reason why is because certain neurotransmitters require you put in the raw materials in order to be produced. Serotonin, for example, is only produced in the body through a certain amino acid, which is called tryptophan. Tryptophan is a type of amino. Do we know what amino acids are, by the way?
Yeah.
All right. Are we confused about this protein thing? No?
They're building blocks of protein, right?
Right. Exactly. Yes. Because we've been confused about protein for so many years. And everyone's like, where do you get your protein? And the protein wars and whatever. And we come to find out it's all a bunch of rubbish. Everything we ever thought protein was is 100% false. All protein is building material. Protein in of itself doesn't do anything in the body, actually. It just goes into the body, and it's like, my friend Wade Lightheart explains it pretty well. He says that there's only two things that work in the body, actually, as like, machinery. It's probiotics and enzymes. So you put in like your fats, your carbs, your protein, different things like that, and then they kind of develop like this building material, and then your enzymes go in to start cleaving off, let's say, certain amino acids that needs, like, hey, this person needs to produce more serotonin, we need to regulate their emotions or their immune system, whatever, and then it's like, okay, I need that tryptophan, let me pull that off, let me pull off the other cofactors from that building material, and then distribute that wherever it needs to go. Does that idea make sense? So tryptophan, I come to find out, is heat sensitive, like very heat sensitive. Tryptophan is very present in cacao, by the way, but when you have cooked chocolate products, there is no tryptophan. There's no vitamin C, there's no phenethylamines, which are other hormone precursors that help us focus and feel good. Those are all present in raw chocolate, but they're not present in cooked chocolate. The heating process has a very abusive effect on certain nutrients, certain delicate chemistry. Vitamin C is another one that we really need to be on board with. The tryptophan, though, serotonin is basically our stress defense shield. If you get into Gabriel Cousins' work, you'll start to realize he really touches on this stuff more, especially in his book, Depression-Free Living. That is a great book, by the way, on what I'm talking about balancing and supporting your neurotransmitter chemistry. Very important piece of work, because in the field of psychiatry, we get fed with this whole, like, oh, it was your mother, and you just have this thing, whatever. It's like you just have this attachment, you're mad at your father. By the way, if you have liver problems, Chinese believe that you have issues with your father, heart problems, issues with your mother. That to me makes more sense. But in psychiatry, they're just like writing it off. It's just an excuse to pass on some pill. But if you go to like Dr. Daniel Amen's clinic, is anyone familiar with Dr. Amen? Dr. Amen is the lead psychiatrist. He's a psychiatrist, but he doesn't approach it the same way. He's revolutionizing the field, because what he does is he actually puts people under functional brain scans. Is he's like, psychiatry is the only field of medicine where we don't study the organ or the muscle of use, right? Nobody's studying the brain. So what he came to find out was people that had like marital issues, communication issues, like problems at work, problems focusing, and they were just written off by their doctor, psychiatrist, like, you're under stress and just whatever. They went to him. He does a functional brain scan on them, finds out they have holes in their brain. And he's like, oh, that's why your marriage is failing. Because your husband is being exposed, because let's say, and a good example is your husband works in a furnishing factory, and he's being exposed to VOCs, chemicals that come off all our, our environment and all our furniture, and he's been doing that for 5 years. Now there's craters in his brain. Very important perspective on this thing. Here's the next thing I want to touch about on the brain chemistry part, is something I'm really into, and I really believe this is the underutilized key to longevity, which is called myelination. Has anyone ever heard of myelin or myelin sheathing? Okay. Yeah, this is a very interesting area of research that I've been getting into. For years, there's two aspects of it. For years, I was really into the myelin sheath, which is basically the nerve fiber insulator, right? And this is one of the things I talk about in this packet, is that your nervous system is really the key to everything, right? When your nervous system starts to break down, it inhibits the electrical transfer of information packets that are riding along this like electrical highway that are going from one area of the body to another. For example, barefoot. I don't like being in shoes anymore for a number of reasons. Anatomically, it throws your whole alignment off, right? When Nike first came out, a couple of years later, they found out massive boom in osteoporosis, back problems, knee problems, hip issues. That's one reason I don't like it. Another reason is because the shoe is like a rubber insulator from you to the earth. So if you get grounded, like people, like your mother might say, hey, you need to be grounded. You're too excitable. You're too airy-fairy, whatever. There's real science behind that, actually. Is that when we're grounded to the electromagnetic grid of the earth that's actually producing negative ions, those ions, your body, the acid-alkaline equation, you can look at it from different perspectives. You can look at it from purely electrical, which is like you're either positively charged or you're negatively charged. Negative would be alkaline. Positive would be acid, like the two sides of a battery, for example. So most of us are positively charged because we're disconnected. So once we connect to the earth, we automatically become alkaline. And if you read a book called Earthing, you'll find out that when someone that has thick blood, like blood platelets that thick up and become gluey, once they get on the earth, there's a 50% reduction in actually blood thinning. So people that are on blood thinners have a 50% reduction in their medication use just from getting grounded. That's huge, right? So the point I'm going with that is your myelin sheath is the insulator. It protects and it shields your nervous system. This is what it looks like right here. This is a healthy functioning nerve cell, and this is the myelin sheath. This is the rubber wiring around that electrical unit. So this is helping us conduct information. So that when I plug into the ground like this, automatically my K2 point on my foot is transmitting energy all the way up through my body to my brain. So people have been known, when they get grounded, they've been known to automatically stimulate new ideas. Leonardo da Vinci, possibly one of the greatest geniuses in world history. When he was doing his thing, he wasn't known to be in the cathedrals and in the city with like Pablo Picasso and Michelangelo and all them. He wasn't in the institution. He was in nature, actually. I came to find out by studying him. He actually went off to nature to find inspiration. That's interesting. Nature's rhythmic. Nature, there's a natural flow going on within nature, and when you get connected, they didn't have like Nikes back then. They didn't have that. So I imagine that they were probably barefoot or had some very thin some kind of thin natural material. But the point is, when you get into nature, you start to stimulate new ideas, new downloads, right? So the problem going on with the degenerative disease, my personal conviction at this point is that every single degenerative condition is a nervous system dysfunction. Food is fuel, right? It's fueling. No, food is information, is really what it is. And we're basically uneducated biological life forms. So what we have to do is re-educate our genetics. Okay? There is no condition you can think of, that I can think of, right, that is incurable. Is anyone familiar with Napoleon Hill and Think and Grow Rich?
Yes.
What the mind of man can conceive and believe it can achieve. I believe and I can conceive that every single big C condition can be wiped away, can be totally cleared out. Every single genetic disposition is a false diagnosis and can be switched back on. Your epigenetic factors, meaning how your genetics switch certain triggers on, all we have to do is turn the negative triggers, the obesity gene, for example, turn that off, turn the lean muscle longevity gene on. It's that simple, right? How can we go from hating cancer to despising cancer to loving cancer? Right? How can we adjust the peripheral filter in which we're looking at the world, in which we're looking at ourselves? Because sometimes all it takes, I learned this from Anthony Robbins, all it takes is an adjustment in how you approach something. Right? You're only a millimeter off. It's not miles away. Especially now that you're on this track right here, you're only a millimeter off. It just requires a different adjustment in perception. So your myelin, this shield right here, as you can see, this is the healthy shield. This right here is scarred myelin. Now, I've always been aware of the sheath, which is the protector, right? Which is what we're looking at, and there's nutritional components to that. For example, vitamin B12 is absolutely critical for the development. Actually, when people become vitamin B12 deficient, this is what happens. This is actually what's happening, is that your protective sheath is breaking down. Now, meat and dairy is not really a great source of vitamin B12. We got sold that. The meat that people, well, that's a whole long thing. I don't even know what that stuff is. That stuff's so far out of my reality, actually, that whenever it pops into my head, I'm like, oh my God, it's still going on. Like the factory farming and all that. Like and by the way, I'm not here to say like you need to be a vegetarian or you need to be a raw foodist. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like the polar extreme of the whole situation, right? It just came back to me. I'm like, oh man. So vitamin B12 is very important. So for years as a raw foodist, I was more on the fanatical side and more on the idealistic side, and I still am, but it's more matured now, where I understand the situation a little differently. Vitamin B12, I think everyone should probably be looking into a really good methylcobalamin supplement. I mean, why not? We take other supplements. We take other omega-3 fatty acid supplements. By the way, omega-3 is another one. The DHA is very important for the building of that sheath. And this is the issue when people do become vegans for too long, but they're not building a strategy. Right? We get into it because for ethical reasons, but we're not focused on health. Health comes first and foremost. Right? Gabriel Cousens said that the death of a fish is far less detrimental to the environment than a human out of balance. And we see what's going on in the world with a lot of humans out of balance, right? So you got to figure that out. That's kind of what I'm saying here on this whole peak performance system, is that it's a personal exploration, right? I can't tell you that you need to be this or you need to be that, or that you can cure cancer or diabetes or anything with raw food. I can't say that, but I've seen it. I've seen every case. I've seen every case of gut issues, of the big C word, of diabetes cleared in front of my eyes, and I've seen it from an extended view as well. Right? Gabriel Cousens, he has the highest rate of diabetic reversal in the world. 70% plus of diabetes type 2, 30% diabetes type 1. That's insane if we're going to listen to the medical discourse on these things. Right? One side says that it's totally incurable. We don't even know what it is. It's a genetic mutation. We can't do anything. Food doesn't have anything to do with it. Eat this pill. Right? That's one side of it, but about 5 miles away, the other side is, oh yeah, 2-3 weeks off insulin, 4 weeks completely relieved of this thing we call diabetes, and blood sugar's back to normal, insulin production, pancreas is starting to work again, enzymes, the mineral, people get mineralized, right? Diabetes, what is that? That's a mineral deficiency. The pancreas is drawing in the most concentration of minerals of any organ. We become demineralized because we're eating food that's only grown with 3 minerals, NPK, right? And one of them is phosphorus, which is highly acidic, and if we don't balance it out with magnesium and other alkaline minerals like iron, like manganese, like sodium, calcium, so on and so forth, we're going to be in an extreme imbalance. Make sense? This is just correlating what's going on here with all this. Back to the myelin. The other thing I found out about myelin, by the way, just real quick, magnesium and sulfur. Those are 2 key minerals that go into the construction of that shield. When we're magnesium deficient, which 95% of people are, we break down very quickly. Neurologically, we break down. ADD, ADHD, attention dialed to a higher dimension. That is, I'll call it, that's a magnesium deficiency. Is I've seen it right in front of me. People get on chocolate, it snaps them back on. In fact, most of the people out there talking like the anti-cacao people, does anyone know about this? No. Okay, well then just consider this a pre-frame. I suspect that there's some kind of neurotic stuff going on. When you get into like the health field, you start to notice like, at first it's all roses and flowers, and then you get deeper into it and you're like, oh, wait a minute, there's like a heavy amount of neurosis going on here. Magnesium, right? I honestly would say that one good raw chocolate bar a day is definitely a part of a healthy diet. It's definitely a part of good hormone balance. And I'm probably the second biggest, yeah, right? I'm probably the second biggest advocate in the world at this point of raw chocolate. I would put that out there. I definitely think that at this point. It's saving people's lives. It's definitely saving the rainforest. It's one of the only foods that you can only grow in a rainforested environment because it's the 3rd biggest food crop in the world, and it has to be grown in a rainforest environment, the Theobroma cacao plant, because it's an anomalous plant. It's one of the most like unique, ridiculous plants in the world. You can't grow it in your backyard. It has to have a shading, like tropical rainforest shading. It has to have like a muddy, moist soil to actually grow properly. If it doesn't have that environment, then it just dies. So the loggers can't come in and just cut down all the trees because they need it, right?